All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. And if more people join us, then that would be great. Feel free as we go to ask questions in the chat. You won't be able to unmute yourself or turn on your camera, but you should be able to ask questions in the chat, and I will stop periodically to try to check that. So we're going to go over today conditional uses in Baltimore City. And this webinar is primarily intended for an audience of applicants, but there may be some other people who are also attending who are just interested in conditional uses. They may be opposing something coming up in their neighborhood, or they just might have some questions about it. So we will get right into it. So first of all, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Becky Witt. I'm the Executive Director of BMZA. We are a small staff here of 5, and then we have 5 board members and a couple alternates as well. So the board is the entity that makes all the decisions. The staff doesn't make any of the decisions. We just help to prepare the board. So I can't tell you how the board will see your case or give you any kind of legal advice on your specific case, but I can talk in general about what the board has done in the past. So many of you have probably seen a map like this before. This is a zoning map of Baltimore City, and all the different colors represent the different zoning districts in the city. They more or less are residential, commercial, and industrial. And there are a few other kinds of zoning districts as well, but most properties fall within residential, commercial, or industrial zoning districts. And you can kind of see, if you know the city, the different commercial zoning districts. You can see, Harford Road coming out to the northeast, various other kind of commercial corridors and industrial corridors too, kind of along rivers and along the harbor. So the way that the zoning code works is that you might have a property. You can look up the zoning district that it's located in, and then there are these tables in the back of the zoning code that have different uses that might be available in each of those zoning districts. So we're going to get into the uses next. There are 3 main types of uses that are in the zoning code. There are the uses that are permitted by right, meaning that you still need to get a use permit, but you don't need any other special kind of permission in order to have that use there. So a common permitted use is if you're in a residential zoning district, a single family dwelling is going to be a permitted use in every residential zoning district. And there's lots of other kinds of uses that are allowed in residential zoning districts by right. For example, a church is usually allowed by right in most residential zoning districts, or place of worship, they're called in the zoning code. So that's one category of uses, permitted uses. There's also conditional uses, which is what we're mostly going to be talking about today. And conditional uses can either be granted by the board, by the BMZA, or by ordinance of the city council, depending on what kind of use you're looking for. And we'll talk about that in a second. And then non-conforming uses. So non-conforming uses are any other use other than permitted and conditional. So things that are listed in the code, but they have a little empty box next to it, that's not allowed, it's non-conforming. Yeah, so that's anything other than what is listed as permitted or conditional is considered non-conforming, meaning that the board cannot approve it unless it was a previously approved use that has continued continuously and not been interrupted. In that case, the board could probably grant a continuation of a pre-existing non-conforming use, but not a new one. They can't create new ones. So these tables, like I said, of uses are found in the back of the zoning code. In the back, there's tons of different tables for each different zoning district saying what kind of uses are permitted, what kinds are conditional, and which, whether you need to go to the board or whether you need to go to the city council for the conditional use. It's really important when you're applying to the board or really doing anything zoning related to use the names and the categories that are listed in the zoning code. Sometimes people apply to us and they use the name of, let's say they want to have use a property as a place where community members can come and host meetings and events. They might submit that as an office space, but it really might better fit under something like a community center space or community center use. Or sometimes they might submit a use as a cultural facility, but really it makes more sense as a community center. So it makes sense when you're thinking about what kind of use works best for you, for what you're asking for, to read the code and to look up the definitions in the code. If you look and you can't find it, feel free to reach out to us and we can try to find the definitions for you so that you can read them and so that you can apply them to what you're asking for. So it's really important to read the definition of each use and make sure that your activities on the site match the definition. It's not so much about who is operating the site as it is about what activities take place on the site. So let's say a church owns a site that all it has on it is a parking lot. That doesn't, just because it's owned by a church, doesn't make the use of that parking lot a church, right? Unless there's religious services happening on that site. So that's all important to think about ahead of time. Like I said, because the zoning code is 600 pages long, it might be difficult to find exactly what you're looking for. So if you do need to find a definition of something, feel free to reach out and we can try to help you. So this is what the tables look like. I just took a screenshot of a common use table that we look at. This is for it's a residential set of zoning districts from R5 to R10. So within each category of uses, there's usually a number associated with it. So in residential, which is R, it can go from R1 to R10. And the smaller the number is, the less intense the use is, and the bigger the number is, the more intense the use is. So that means that if you have an R1 zoning district, the use is generally single family detached dwellings with large lot sizes. And if you are talking about R10 as a zoning district, you're talking about apartment buildings with lots of density. So here we have the denser kind of row house and multifamily zoning districts. And these are the uses that are in the table. So as you can see here, this is only part of the table. This isn't the complete table, but there are some uses that have P in the little box. Some of them say CO, and some of them say CB, and some of them are empty. So like we just went over, P means permitted, meaning permitted by right. CB is conditional use by the board. CO is conditional use by ordinance. And if it's blank, that means it's not allowed. It's a non-conforming use in that zoning district. All right, so we'll get into now the standards of what the board and what the city council actually need to apply when they're confronted with a request for a conditional use. And these are taken from the handout that the board has, that a set of questions that they use when they're evaluating an application in front of them. And if you don't have this handout, you've never seen it before, I will be happy to send it to you afterwards. So the board has to find, would the establishment of this conditional use at this location be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, or welfare? Would it be precluded by other law? So there are other kinds of laws in the city that might say you can't have a particular use here, specifically urban renewal plans, which oftentimes have slightly stricter rules. So if it would be precluded by a different law, the board can't approve it. Would the authorization be contrary to the public interest? And would it be in harmony with the purpose and intent of the zoning code? So these are the four main questions that are in the code that the board needs to answer. And then there's a bunch of other factors that the board can consider if they're relevant. Excuse me. So this might be a little bit small, but like I said, I'll send you this form afterwards if you would like it. So the board should consider, where appropriate, things like the nature of the site itself, its size and shape, the proposed size and shape and arrangement of structures. Traffic is a big issue that comes up with conditional uses, which we might get into a little bit later. So traffic patterns, whether there's adequate on-site parking, or if there's enough parking nearby, the nature of the surrounding area, and whether or not the proposed use might harm future development. Proximity of dwellings, churches, schools, public structures, other places of public gathering, emergency vehicle access, light and air to the premises. Let's see, I'm going to skip down here. Preservation of cultural and historical landmarks, character of the neighborhood, the comprehensive master plan, and then there's some kind of catch-all provisions at the very bottom. Any other matters considered to be part of the general welfare. So there's lots of different things that the board can consider, and obviously each case is completely different depending on whether you're talking about a healthcare clinic or some sort of heavy industrial use or a childcare center. Those are all going to be very different, and the board needs to take them into consideration and think about the surrounding area and whether it's going to be harmful to the neighborhood. There's something that's really important for everyone to know about conditional uses, which is that there's a presumption in favor of the applicant, meaning that the board, starting off from the beginning, in the law, it says that the board needs to presume that this use is appropriate for this space. So the property owner has the presumption of validity, meaning that if you're the applicant coming in, the presumption is in your favor. If you are the opposition to a conditional use, the presumption is not in your favor. This is really important to understand as part of conditional uses. And I'll talk just one more second about that. The board can only deny a conditional use if it finds that the harmful effects of that use are greater at this specific location than they would be anywhere else within the zoning district. And so that is kind of the main question that the board has to ask. They ask all the other questions too, but the board has to find that there's something specific about this location that makes it inappropriate for this use. So here are some examples that I can think of anyway. There's probably many other examples. The board once denied a use for a property as a motorcycle club because the property itself did not have any off-street parking. And so the board thought, well, you know, if people want to use this site for any other kind of social club, maybe that might make sense. But for this kind of social club, it doesn't really make sense to use a structure that has absolutely no parking if the whole point of the use is to get together and fix motorcycles, right? Because then the motorcycles are going to be all over the street and the sidewalk and getting in people's way. So that's one example of where the board denied a conditional use because it was just not appropriate for that specific property. It could be appropriate for a different property, maybe even in the same block, as long as it had some off-street parking for that use. Another example where the board denied a conditional use is for a drive-through on a property where the exit for the cars was on a street that had a curve to it. And so the community said, you know, if you start increasing the amount of traffic on this exit here, and a drive-through is a very car-intensive use, obviously, that there's going to be a lot more accidents because of the location of that exit and the fact that it's kind of a blind curve there. So the board denied that one as well. There's another one where the board denied outdoor live entertainment because that specific property, the way it was set up and the way that other properties around it were set up, it really amplified the sound in this way that was harmful to a nearby senior high rise, and the noise was just really too much for that neighborhood. So those are some examples of when the board has denied a conditional use, but obviously based on the presumption here, the presumption's in favor of the applicant. So in most cases, the board does approve a conditional use just based on what the law says about conditional uses in general. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few examples of conditional use requests that we get a lot. So if this doesn't apply to you, you don't have to pay attention. Daycare centers are uses that we get quite a bit because they are conditional use in most residential zoning districts. I think maybe even all. So the difference is that daycare home is a definition for a dwelling where the resident themselves is taking care of up to 8 children, including their own children. And daycare home is permitted by right in most residential districts. Daycare center, however, that residency requirement is removed, and also the limit of up to 8 children is also removed. So that is a more intense use than a daycare home. So daycare center is a conditional use, whereas daycare home is a permitted use in most places. So again, applying the conditional use standard, the board has to presume that this is an appropriate use unless they hear specific evidence to say why it's not. And the kinds of things that the board wants to hear about are off-street parking. How are you going to do pickup and drop off of children? Hours of operation. So for example, basically the board wants to hear about what the impact is going to be on the neighborhood. So if you're in the middle of a residential neighborhood, how are you going to make sure that you don't have 25 cars trying to drop off their children all at the same time, basically? And then that would cause some chaos with the neighbors. Exterior lighting, especially for daycares that are open later at night or even during the winter. Obviously, it's dark a lot of the day. So making sure that people are safe as they're coming to and from their vehicles or walking to and from the house. So those are some major things that come up for daycares. Neighborhood commercial establishment is another big category of conditional uses for they're basically commercial uses that are allowable in residential zoning districts. And so we want to be a little bit careful about how we approve those because they could have some negative effects on the neighborhood being in this residential zoning district. But these are the ones that are allowable in the I think it's R5 to R10 zoning districts. Art galleries, art studios, daycare centers, offices, personal services establishments, restaurants, and retail goods. So if you see someone who's asking for, let's say, a convenience store use, that would fall under retail goods. And the board would have to find, whether this retail goods use at this location would be more harmful than it would be anywhere else in that neighborhood. So another couple of important things to know about neighborhood commercial establishments, if you have one of those kinds of cases coming up before the board, if you're selling retail goods, like I just talked about convenience stores, which is a common kind of case that we have that comes before us, you're not allowed to sell alcohol and you're not allowed to sell tobacco if you're applying for retail goods within a neighborhood commercial establishment use in the code. Another thing, if you are applying for a restaurant as neighborhood commercial, you're not allowed to have live entertainment there. And if you're applying for an office as a neighborhood commercial establishment, it's really important to separate the idea of an office use from a healthcare clinic. So a lot of times people will apply for an office as neighborhood commercial and they'll say, we're going to do mental health counseling at this office. Because the definition of office sounds very open-ended and like you could do a lot of different things there. The issue though is that if you're providing any kind of healthcare services, that is not allowed in an office use. You would have to find a commercial zoning district to do a healthcare clinic. So any kind of healthcare, including mental health care, has to be done in a commercial district and cannot be done in a residential care facility, or sorry, a residential district. The question is, would a juice bar be considered a restaurant? See, this is the kind of questions that we hear. Let me share my screen to a different page and show you how we would figure that out. So hold on just a second. gonna go straight to the zoning code itself. Like I said, it's 600 pages long, so we have to do a lot of searching to find what we're looking for. So the zoning code itself doesn't include the word juice, I'm pretty sure. Okay, it does under the term farmer's market, but that's not what we're looking for. So probably the two categories that a juice bar might fit under are either a restaurant or retail goods. So let's look at the definition of retail goods. Okay. This is the definition here. It says, it's obviously a very broad definition that can include a lot of different things that sells goods, wares, or other merchandise. It can apply to things like a delicatessen, bakery, grocery, or similar establishment that sells ready-to-eat food products, including incidental seating areas for consumption of food on the premises. So sometimes, if it's kind of a coffee shop type of vibe where you're selling ready-to-eat products, like you're selling sandwiches or something, it could fit under retail goods, or it could fit under restaurant. Look it up really quick. Which means an establishment where food and drinks are provided to the public primarily for on-premises consumption by seated patrons. So you would have to decide how your specific business is going to be run and which category it fits under better. So if you're expecting people to just grab something and take it out with them, then that could be under retail goods. Or if you're expecting people to sit down and consume things on the premises primarily, like more than half the time they'd stay, then that would probably fall under restaurant. So it could be under either one, depending on how you operate it. That's a good question. Right, yeah, thank you, Roxana. Yeah, drop the link in the chat to the zoning code. Happy to do that. There you go. Okay, warehouse at TOD 2, is it possible to do conditional use for body shop and use auto sales? So let's look up a TOD 2. That's kind of a less common zoning district. So off the top of my head, I will not know. Hold on just a second. Okay. TOD, let's see. Okay, here we are. So this TOD stands for transit oriented development. These tend to be around like light rail stops or other kinds of transit oriented locations. So I'm scrolling down to, I'm looking for industrial. Let me look at the question again. Hold on. Can we do conditional use for body? Yeah, I think that's under motor vehicle, which I don't see here at all. So if it's not listed at all, then that means you can't do it. It's the same thing as if it had a blank square. So it would normally be listed under motor vehicle repair, and I don't see it in this table. So the answer would be no. The board doesn't have the authority to grant something that is just not in the table. Okay. All right, so I think I had, right, so if right now the code does not allow something, then you would have to go through city council to ask for some sort of legislative change, whether that be to add in a motor vehicle repair use under TOD. That's one way to do it, or to ask for a change to the map to remove you from that zoning district and put you in a more industrial zoning district, which I think is where most of our motor vehicle repair is. But yeah, there would have to be some sort of change to the code. The city council is in charge of what the code says. Right, so if it used to be industrial and there was a code change, you're going to need to talk to your city council member about why that change was made, whether it was a mistake. or what happened there. But if there's something that needs to be like redrawn on the map, or if the text of this zoning code needs to be changed, that is completely through city council and we would have no control over that. But you would need to, yeah, like I said, talk to your city council member. Let me see if I had any more slides that I needed to go over. Sure. I think I had two more really quick ones. Okay, so, right, we already talked about these. And then, oh, also for neighborhood commercial establishments, they're exempt from off-street parking requirements up to 2,500 square feet of floor area. And the use has to be oriented to the pedestrian and not to the automobile. The idea behind neighborhood commercial as a concept is that neighborhoods need certain kinds of amenities close by. So if you have a store across the street, that's convenient to you, and you can go and pick up some milk or whatever. If there's like a restaurant or a cafe or something nearby, then that's helpful to you. So the idea is not that people are going to be driving from all over parts of the city to get to this neighborhood commercial establishment. The idea is that it's for the people in the neighborhood. So that's why the off-street parking waiver or exemption exists for those kinds of uses. Where this sometimes comes up, and I know we have one of these coming through in a few weeks, is that people will apply for an office use for a tag and title business. And that, in that case, the board has sometimes said no, because that use is oriented to people driving automobiles and not to pedestrians. But that can sometimes depend on the specifics of that case. So not in every circumstance, but something to keep in mind. So yeah, that is everything that I had for my presentation. I will stop sharing for a second and see if there are any other questions that I can answer. Does anybody else have questions? I don't see any. I hope that was helpful in terms of like how we go through the process of looking at the tables and making sure that the use that you're actually asking for matches the definitions that are in the code. We spend a lot of time with people who are applying for different uses, just making sure that what they actually want to do is what they're applying for. So sometimes people apply for like a restaurant use, but really what they wanted was a banquet hall. Or sometimes people will apply for a community center, but really what they needed was something else. So that's what we try to do ahead of time so that you don't have to do that at the hearing and waste the board's time. Where can I get the zoning code? So I put a link to it if you scroll up, but I will copy it and paste it again in the chat. Here it is. All right. If you have other questions, definitely feel free to reach out via email and we'll be available to you that way. But thank you for coming. And I will try to also send this recording out so that you can refer back to it later if you need to. Thanks so much.